everybody to GLOBEBUSTERS.
We accept the reality of the world with which we're presented. It's as simple as that.
And welcome to GLOBEBUSTERS Season 10, Episode 5. Newton has been debunked. Should be a good show. We're going to cover a bunch of topics. So smash the like for the YouTube algo. You know how that goes. And support us over on Rockfin. We'll finish the show over there. Links in the description. All right, let's go ahead and introduce the panel. First up, we got my boy Jeran. What's going on, my brother?
How's it going, my friend? Doing fantastic. Doing well. Thank you.
Nice.
No complaints.
Very cool. And Zack from Good Times for All. How's it going, bro?
Not too bad, man. Not too bad. Been I got 17 of the 20 Fortnite maps done so far, and I'm almost ready to release them all. And yeah, so I've been busy lately. You know what's crazy though, dude? Something happened on Fortnite, and they won't let me use the word Africa. Somebody put something in something, and I don't know. Jeran said there was a big hoo-ha about it. I don't know. But I can't, I mean, it's the continent of Africa, right? At first it was African, and then I changed it to Africa, and they were like, yeah, okay, that's fine. And then I woke up this morning, I got 3 emails for 3 of the 4 maps that say, oh, yeah, you can't do that. And I don't understand it. What do you call people from Africa? What do you call the continent of Africa? I don't understand why I can't use the word Africa. It's just weird. So that's what I've been dealing with the last couple days.
Wow. Very, very exciting, brother. Well, you need to be more considerate.
I guess. I don't get it. I just don't get it. I mean, I understand certain words can hurt people and whatnot, but this is one of the 7 continents on the plane, So making that a hurt word, then they need to make up a new word for it or something. I don't know. I don't know who to get a hold of or whatnot, but I don't even know what to call the map now. All the other ones are like South America, North America, Eurasia, Australia. What do I call Africa?
Spell it with 2 F's.
Hey, I could try that.
I don't know why you did that, but
I just don't know. I don't get it. So yeah, I'll figure something out. But yeah, the maps are almost ready. I'm just working on some odds and ends, making sure when people play it for the first time, it's all ready to go. But yeah, it's been a long time in the making. It's crazy how much can go into this stuff. It really is. But yeah,
Nice.
Been busy.
Very cool. And we also have my boy Alan from Space Audits on today. How's it going, bro?
Yo, what up, big dog? It's going good. We got Toby backstage as well, ready to join us.
Yeah, let me throw him on. One on cam here. And we do also have my boy Toby from Ether Cosmology. What's going on, brother?
Yo, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound good.
Not much. Alan just pinged me about this about 15 minutes ago. So here I am. I don't know. I think here we're going to talk about some GPS. So yeah.
Yeah. My idea was to quickly cover the kind of Newton debacle and how people still think that's a thing. And then I think that can pretty easily transition to how well they still claim to use that for their GPS and their satellites and everything. And how that obviously isn't even an option. And then we can kind of get into the specifics wherever it goes. So cool. All right. Anybody got something they want to throw out at the top of the show before we jump into it?
no. Matt Walsh is a simp. There you go. That's all I got.
Yeah. I was gonna say, if you haven't seen, somebody's keyboard's hot. My boy Jeran's been burying Matt Walsh because he used to be his hero, and
I used to have posters of him on the wall. I took them all down.
he feels betrayed, and so he's been
Dress up as him
spiraling.
for Halloween.
That was his role model, but it's all good. I mean, Jared did make a good point. I mean, people like really revered this man because he knew that like women were women. It's like, oh wow, this guy's a genius.
Let's all follow him.
Yeah, he's
I
like,
guess
we're gonna.
a lot of people in his chat section though, or comment section, were saying, "Wow, I've never seen so many people disagree with Matt before in his comment section." So that's telling you something right there.
Oh, what started the whole thing was he was like, I really like this movie, you know, whatever it was.
The first man with that one.
The first man, yeah, I really liked the movie of the moon landing. It was very cool. And then people just buried him in the comments. They were like, "You're stupid, bro. You know, the moon landing's fake." And so then he got triggered, and well, you know what's really funny is when he makes his little video about the moon landing, he calls it denialism. It's like, isn't that the same type of terminology that you speak out against for like the leftist woke crowd? That's like they use like denial, like science denialism, and like you're using the same type of cancel culture terminology that you claim to be speaking out against.
Yeah, and then he talks about, there's no way you can have all these people believe something that's a lie, and it's like, what?
Every argument was stupid.
Yeah, every argument was bad.
Yeah,
He's
what
like,
media group is he a part of? What's the media group?
the Daily Wire, the
Yeah,
most trusted and reputable platform on the internet.
I don't think any of them that are on there, and I see videos from all of them all the time, that have said anything about flat Earth in a positive light whatsoever, like even questioning it or anything.
Oh,
like
Candace
that.
Owens said she doesn't believe in the moon landing.
Oh yeah, true. Candace, yeah, I forgot she was even part of that. Yeah,
She's actually at odds with basically everyone else on there, though, from my understanding. But I will say we got to quickly like one of the, he says like everyone had to be on it. If your conspiracy that requires tons of people being on a secret, then like it's not feasible. Blah blah blah. Well, that's weird that the Apollo director himself said that the simulations were so good that no one in the control room would be able to tell the difference in a simulation and the real thing. So
yeah, I read Bill Casing's books this week, and I mean, you probably need 100 people max. I mean, that's max 100 people in on it. And that's just people that are in charge of the facilities where it's happening, and then the people who are maybe ordering or fabricating the things for the set.
I don't even think that though, right? Because that's another argument he made was like even the people in the set. It's like, well, no, they have cover stories that they were just practicing and training. So like you could have made the set and then maybe watch the moon landing and be like, this looks familiar, right? But even they wouldn't necessarily need to know. It may would be safer that they know, right? Or they have NDAs, but
well, they can just look at the Manhattan Project and that there was 300,000 people involved on that, and never got leaked. Nobody ever knew anything about it. It was so compartmentalized, nobody even knew what was going on.
Exactly. Okay, so Mr. Smart Guy who brought up invoked IQ in his argument is clearly not doing so well right now.
No.
That was his other argument, literally, was that people's IQ has dropped. And I'm like, yes, we know, we are seeing it on display currently. Yes. By yourself.
Keep talking.
Dude. And then what else does he say? He says technology, a lot of people say technology always gets better. Yeah, that's just objective. And then he says, but he uses an example of a commercial flight that used to be really fast back in the day, and how now that we don't have them even faster. And we're like, he's like, so that hasn't improved over time. Incorrect. Airplanes go way faster now than they used to. Go look at what the military flies. Like the fact that the commercial companies made an economic decision, right, on what they're going to offer in mass to make it more affordable to people to get on planes. And that has nothing to do with if the actual technology has improved. You're retarded. So he's just wrong on every front. I think his strongest argument was that you shot a laser at the reflector on the moon.
And even that's
yeah, it's just trash. It's like, well, they claim they did that before the fact, and then they say that they have to have incredibly sensitive information that runs it through algorithms to supposedly find a spike to get like one photon back and all this weirdo stuff.
1 out of 300 quadrillion.
Yo,
that one.
People say that with a straight face. Like he said it so confidently that it ended the whole debate.
I forgot, it wasn't you, Alan. Somebody sent me a paper of a guy who was talking about those, and he said that he doesn't think anybody has ever bounced anything off any reflectors. He goes, every time they've sent it, it's just if they get anything back, it's off the moon. There's no way it's any reflector. He wrote a paper. It was like a peer-reviewed paper. I'll find it. I was talking about it last night on my show too, and I couldn't remember who sent it to me. Somebody sent it to me. Somewhere in
Well, yeah,
television.
but the way the idea that you're shooting a laser like 250,000 miles and back is pretty absurd on its face.
Well, they say by the time it gets there, the laser's 6 miles wide. So, like 6 mile wide, and you're trying to hit a little square retroreflector that Buzz put up there after a beer or two.
Yeah, but can you just show me the laser being seen at like 40 miles up first? Like, can you show me that?
Yeah,
That'd
no,
be
it just
cool.
goes two. Just goes two. Hey, let me ask this question because I asked Alan this week, and I talked about it on my show yesterday. I'm still baffled by it. Maybe you can help me. So, how is it that with GPS that if let's just say I'm in 3 places, I'm either on my roof, or I'm on my neighbor's roof, or I'm down the street at a park. So how can it be that the GPS satellites, so-called, send a beam to my phone with, and I know it encodes what time the beam was sent from the satellite, whatever, and it's able to determine where I'm at to that kind of accuracy. So the amount of time difference between me here or me at my neighbor's house or me at down the street would be so tiny. I don't understand how they can then say that we don't have to look at weather when we shoot these beams. How does the beam coming from 22,000 miles away, getting through clouds and rain or snow, not affect the speed as much as it would me moving houses one house over? Like, to me, it just seems impossible. Like, how would, it doesn't even seem like it's real. Like, how would that make a difference? I mean, if it's coming from 22,000 miles away, it would hit the atmosphere, and then wouldn't it refract? They say that it's getting a denser medium, so it's going to hit the denser medium on the way down. That would all adjust the speed. So how could the speed be so accurate that you could tell whether I'm at my house or my neighbor's house? But then again, it's not accurate enough that we need to take weather into account. It doesn't seem like it works to me. Anybody?
Yeah, I remember you mentioning this on. It's a pretty interesting question, to be honest. I don't
Yeah, I just don't know how it works.
Well,
I don't know. I don't even know what frequency they claim to use for starters.
I think Alan would I think Alan would probably have a good answer on this, but my understanding is that essentially they do, to a small extent, have to account for weather conditions. There are variables to take those things into account, but overall, I guess that it would be lost in the order of magnitude, because the, quote unquote velocity of light or whatever is just moving those tiny bits of refraction you'd be hitting here and there would be negligible. But then I don't know. That's a good question, because even so, if we're going to account for a 16 nanosecond difference between New York
Exactly.
City and San Francisco, then yeah, you would think it really necessarily wouldn't be lost just in the order of magnitude.
Exactly, because like the differential is so precise. I mean, I guess they say that they use around 1500 megahertz frequency. So, I mean, actually, the higher the frequency, the higher the rate of attenuation. It's all very interesting. I don't know. Because also think about this: if you were to send a signal down to a flat Earth and a globe, it would be different. So, like, if I'm standing directly under, let's just call it a satellite or a satelloon, and it sends a signal down. If you're 100 miles to my left and there's someone else 100 miles to my right, the signal is going to be returned from a different position on a plane.
Right.
That's just extended out horizontally, as opposed to a globe where you're going to be, a significant distance further down away from the signal.
Now,
Right?
I guess, like, theoretically, these crafts would all be, above the weather for the most part, quote unquote. And then when you go to get your signal, your location, you're doing like a trilateration. So you'd be getting those signals from multiple sources. So maybe they are able to average it out and remove out those refractive differences with that. That's just kind of a guess, though.
Yeah, the only thing that gets me on that one is that, but if it's able to tell whether I'm at my house or my neighbor's house. And so the difference in speed between that would be so minuscule that then I would think, well, if that's so tiny, but you can tell the difference, then how could weather not make a difference? I would assume the speed would change. If there's a snowstorm outside, wouldn't the speed change equal, or, enough that it would be more than just the difference between me and my neighbor's house? But I don't know.
I guess that they officially do say that it does affect it, but then right here it says on gpsinformation.net, cloud, rain, snow, weather in general does not attenuate the GPS signals enough to affect accuracy. But that goes back to your point, which is like,
but
Wait.
it knows the difference between me and my neighbor's house,
yeah.
which is crazy.
Well, let's just so I don't just bastardize the title of the show. Let me
Yes, go
play
do your
this.
I'm
Let
done
me
with
play
it.
this short real quick, and then we'll go right into GPS. That cool? So I'm gonna play this short that Toby made actually. So shout out to Toby. And I guess I quickly recapped for Alan when he popped in on the end of a conversation we had been having, and it fit perfectly within the 60-second limit on the short. So, let me. Now we've been having pretty terrible luck when I try to do this, but hopefully it's gonna work today. So you guys kind of let me know if you don't hear it, and we'll just do it that way. So. Oh my gosh.
No sound.
Oh, you guys can't hear it?
I don't see it playing yet.
Oh, there's Zach. You're back. Okay. Yeah, it didn't work for me either. Forget it. Okay. I'll figure that out in a second. But basically, the summary is that you can't actually even claim Newton in the current paradigm. And it's very simple. I'm going to say this as simple as I can. Hopefully, everyone can follow. It's something called the Sagnac effect, and typically it was considered to happen only if something is taking a circular path. So if you use light, like interferometry, you can measure something moving in a curved path. And that's because the light deviates from the straight path, or in relation to the original straight path. Meaning, if something is curving, you're going to be able to detect that with the light, because of an interference pattern, because of the difference in the positions. Okay, so if something takes a curved path, you can detect that motion with interferometry. The mainstream globe Earth model invokes that very thing to claim ringleader gyros are detecting the rotation of the Earth, and the Sagnac effect does the same thing, blah, 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 blah. So according to Newton, hey, I couldn't explain the video, but according to Newton, they're mass attracting mass, right? You have the mass of the sun creating a force called gravity that is pulling the Earth around the sun, and it's curving around it. This is what everyone's still told to this day. This is, if you go ask everyone in public, 99.9% of them are going to think that's what gravity is, if they even know that much. Everyone still defends it. Everyone thinks, like, they ridicule you for questioning it. Mass attracts mass. Everyone thinks that's what it is, which should be very telling in and of itself. You know, they always say, why would they lie to us? Like, why would they lie to you? Why do they got to lie to you, right? About what the model says. But long story short, if that's truth, there's a couple things to know. And I do have a whole stream on this, but it would have to be instant, because in Newtonian gravity, there is no time variable, meaning it's instantaneous, meaning gravity's already at the sun and at the Earth at the same time. It's already there. There is no traveling, nothing like that. And that requires a medium, because it requires mutual contact, which is why Newton himself said, you know, the idea that gravity could act on innate brute matter, the vastness of a vacuum over long distances, is so great an absurdity that no man with competent faculty of thinking in philosophical matters could ever fall into it. And it requires a medium, and whether this medium is material or immaterial, I've left to the consideration of the readers. So all that to say, Newtonian mechanics requires an ether. Newtonian mechanics says there's an actual force acting on the Earth, causing it to curve around the sun. If that is true, then you would detect it with the interferometry that was used in Michelson-Morley, which was over 10 times more sensitive than it needed to be, and to quote Einstein, should have been decisive. So with all that being said, the only way to explain the Michelson-Morley and subsequent replications from Dayton Miller, etc., was to invoke Einstein. So from 1887 to 1905, there was no answer to Michelson-Morley for the heliocentric model. Obviously, one option is, oh, the Earth's not moving, that's why you don't detect it moving. But instead, of course, they went with Einstein. Okay, all that to say, it is just a fact that you cannot use Newtonian mechanics anymore. And this is what you'll hear from people. And this is very ignorant and inept. They will say, but it works on certain scales, for intents and purposes, we can use it. It works good enough. When they say that, they mean like, oh, the math will work with general accuracy on the small scale. There's a difference in physics and math. Physics is claiming the cause of something. It's explaining the cause of something. In this case, that mass intrinsically has the property of gravity, and that it creates a force that pulls things towards it. That's the mechanical claim of Newtonian gravity. That's the actual physics. The math is separate. It's a description of that claim. Okay. Einstein
what the
claims
world would be like if that were actually the case? I mean, it would just be, you would feel that attraction once you got to something next to something big enough and dense enough. You should be able to, measure that at least a little bit, a tiny thing. I mean, if they're seeing one photon come back from the moon and picking that up on a sensor, then they should have a sensor that could, if Newtonian were real.
well, that's what I'm saying is that, like, in their own paradigm, it's already known to not be real. See, this is like the whole wizardry. Mass attracting mass is over 100, almost 150 years debunked.
That's
in their own
crazy that
belief.
they're still teaching it in schools. I mean, that's what I learned in school.
That's what I'm saying, bro. Like, why? Why it should be? It should. The answer is actually obvious. It's because relativity is convoluted, paradoxical, overly complicated nonsense. You cannot teach people that. You cannot teach people. You're trying to convince them to go against their senses and believe like, oh, everything's the opposite of what I experience, and there's something magical causing it to happen, called gravity. You can't just stride right off of that and your evidence of it be something that they can't understand at all. Right? You just tell them that objects intrinsically attract each other, and just like electrostatics does, or like magnetism does, like quote unquote attraction, which is a misnomer, but it's
Big
because
shout out. Commercial sound and video over on Rockfin, $5. He says watching GLOBEBUSTERS also off of YouTube is safe and effective. Please help the panel's freedom of speech and check it out. Yeah, you guys come on over to Rockfin. Is it free today?
it's free, yes.
Yeah, come on over to Rockfin. It's free. Got 46 people in the chat hanging out. Just come by and say hi at least. We're trying to get the platform, going more. So we're going to finish the show over there. But yeah, it's nice to be able to speak freely and, not get demonetized every other month for something, It's crazy. So yeah, thank you, Nathan. Shout out, man.
On
Yeah,
that
I can't-
topic,
Okay.
about the feeling of different gravitational pulls, when you start digging into the Earth's core and what they say there, the theories about the geodynamo and about geology and stuff, it's kind of crazy because you find out that there's a concept called the Newton's shell theorem, and it's the idea that the gravitational potential on Earth is actually, it should be the greatest at the surface, and in the core, it's just a rule of gravity. You'd actually have the least gravitational pull, but conveniently, our model just magically has a dense iron core, a solid, dense iron core, and they need that to be there so that the gravitational vectors for everyone all over their globe are all pulled uniformly towards their, quote unquote center. But the funny thing is just having that dense, solid iron core, most people don't realize that's actually stands in contrast to what should be expected with gravitational theorems because of the shell theorem.
I've never even thought of that. Yeah.
Like if you were in a core of a gravitational planet or whatever, you would actually be pulled towards the edges, towards the shells, because that's where you would have more of a, as you go out in concentric spheres, if you had layers of concentric spheres as you went out, you'd actually have more mass density going outwards. So you wouldn't have the iron core in the center, like they say.
It's classic, man. They just took the opposite and told us we live on that.
Yeah, like literally.
Just a bunch of ad hoc theories.
Yeah, this ends up having very serious implications, right? Like, so that's basically the summary is with Michelson-Morley, it didn't detect the orbit. And if the Earth was actually orbiting around the sun in a circular path, meaning in the reference frame of the Earth, while you're on the Earth, from the reference of the Earth, any test or measurement done on Earth, also known as in reality, if it's actually curving around the sun, you're going to be able to detect that. We didn't detect it because, of course, it's not actually doing that. So they changed it and they said, oh, well, while you're on the Earth, we're actually not curving. We're free falling in a straight path with a linear speed. And so the interferometry cannot detect it. It's not curving. And that's why we don't detect the orbit of the Earth in Michelson-Morley. That means you cannot claim mass attracts mass or Newtonian gravity at all, period, within the heliocentric paradigm, period. And we have the top proponents defending the globe being told this for months now in detail, still saying it like they're robots who are waiting for their algorithms to be updated and they can't let go of it. It's so weird. And so I walk you through this line of logic. Can interferometry detect circular motion? Yes. Okay. You know, what do they claim that happened to Michelson-Morley? That it quote unquote debunked the ether, as if that's all that they had to do was throw out the ether and then everything worked again. Incorrect. They had to still explain why they didn't detect it with or without the ether. To prove that, can you detect circular motion with interferometry or a curved path, curved motion without ether? They have to say yes. They claim that happens with the Sagnac effect. They claim that's how they can verify the rotation of the Earth. So can you detect a motion, curved motion with interferometry with or without an ether? And they have to say yes. Okay. Do you agree there then if the Earth was actually moving in a curved path around the sun, then we should have detected it with interferometry with or without an ether?
No.
The answer, yeah, exactly. They just start, like you say, short out right there. And it's like, what? Dude, are like, we need like blocks or something that you guys can play with? Like, okay, obviously what that means is you can throw the ether out. That's cool. I mean, in fact, you kind of have to. As soon as you throw the ether out, you threw Newtonian mechanics out anyway. You throw Newtonian gravity out as soon as you throw ether out. But it's a bundle package. They did have to get rid of the ether. They also had to get rid of Newtonian gravity. Okay, this is just a fact. And then they had to come in and explain why we can't detect it. And they say, well, you don't detect the Earth curving around the sun because it's actually not doing that while you're on the Earth. You're free falling in a straight path. But since you're going through a geodesic path of the curvature of space-time, if you go to another reference frame, then it'll be curving. So it's going straight and curving relative to reference frame, right? Which, of course, you can't teach someone in high school that. They're going to be like, what are you talking about? You know, like you can't teach a middle schooler that. Well, you certainly can't teach someone that's like 10 that. Like, why don't we fall off the ball? Well, we're actually curving and going straight at the same time, free falling through the geodesic of the warping and curving of space-time fabric. And it creates a metaphysical railroad that guides things down to the track of the center of the axis of the displacement of mass and the curvature of space-time. I mean, like they're just like mass attracts mass. So anyway, we're debating the inner child of propaganda. So I wanted to make that point pretty clear. I think that was pretty concise there. It's really simple, right? Like Michelson-Morley and subsequent replications and even other tests eliminated Newtonian gravity as an option. So when people bring it up, they say, oh, it works for intents and purposes. What they're saying is, oh, well, it's easier to understand, even though it's not. It's simpler math. And the math works in certain scenarios that we do on the Earth, so we can keep it anyway. But no, we're not talking about the math. We're talking about what's happening in reality. Do you have an actual viable explanation of how the world works? That's what we're trying to figure out, is how the world works and what the world is. If you're making a claim about what it is, you need to show it's even possible that how you're claiming it works can actually happen. That's what physics does. It explains it. It's mechanics. Physics, mechanics, explanatory. power. It explains things. Math then describes that proposed explanation or cause and effect relationship.
And just
Right.
because we can't describe exactly what it is yet, doesn't mean we can't describe what it isn't.
Correct.
You know,
And
we
that's the
can go out and take
falsification.
measurements. Yeah.
Yeah, falsification is independent of replacement. So I wanted to make that point because you're going to see when we continue in this conversation why that's very important, right? Now some people may want to convince themselves it's pedantic or it doesn't matter, or why are you even talking about gravity in the first place? Well, it's very important, and you're going to see why. So what we've established is if the Earth is in fact a sphere and it is tilted, wobbling, spinning, revolving, and orbiting around the sun, it cannot be because of something called mass attracting mass or Newtonian gravity. That cannot be the cause of it objectively, right? So then if you're claiming that's what's happening in reality, even try to convince us it's possible, even in theory, you have to invoke something that's relativistic. And that will forever be the case, meaning even if they move away from Einstein's relativity, whatever they move to still has to be relativistic. Because you have to be like, oh, of course it's going to always look like it's stationary and you can't detect or measure that it's moving, but I promise it is, which requires a relativistic interpretation, right? So no matter where we go forward from here with that pseudoscientific paradigm, it's going to have to invoke something relativistic. And that means that Newton's off the table. So pretty simple. Like I said, one of the recent Sculling Globers is about this. There are fundamental differences. You know, like Newtonian requires an ether. Einstein specifically says there is no actual ether, as in a ponderable media, an actual medium, etc. Newton said gravity is a force, an actual real force. And then Einstein says, no, gravity is not a force. It's a pseudo force. And to quote some globe zealots, which means it has, quote, no known source. It's a force with no known source, of course. Like, it's the goofiest little weird, mental gymnastics ever. So yeah, it's a source with it's
their
a
creator
force.
right there. That's their creator, the
Bro,
scientific creator.
Right, bro. Yeah, big G, little g, it's everywhere. It created everything that you see the way that it is, and it has no known source. Okay, bro. And then Newton says the Earth is actually curving around the sun, an actual curved path caused by that actual force that's curving. And then Einstein says, no, it's free falling in a straight path. So curved path, straight path, force, not a force, ether, not an ether. These are patently opposite claims. If someone says they both work, they're the same. Einstein didn't replace it. Einstein built on Newton. Those are all just wrong and so illogical that it violates the first laws of logic. If anyone doesn't know the three primary laws of logic, right? You have the law of non-contradiction, the law of the excluded middle, and the law of identity. Those are the first three principles of logic. And the first two are the law of non-contradiction and the law of the excluded middle, which is simply like law of non-contradiction is something cannot be true and not true at the same time. Something cannot be the opposite simultaneously. And then the excluded middle means it has to be one or the other. Okay, so it's really simple stuff. The door's not open and closed at the same time. And either has to be opened or closed.
November says Newton's falling apple was the forbidden fruit offered to the masses. Gravity spellcast. Well said. Thank you for the $5.
Yeah, thank you for the support, brother.
Big shout out to John Keeley over on Rockfin. $5 tip. No message. Thank you. Thank you so much, John.
Yeah, thank you guys. So cool. I think I've kind of beat that into the ground. It's pretty simple. I don't see any questions about that. If anyone has any questions about it, we can run back to it and address it if you want to ask the question in the chat. But it's very simple. If the Earth is curving, you would detect it with interferometry. We didn't. They had to throw out Newtonian gravity. They had to claim it wasn't curving. They had to bring in Einstein, claim it's free falling in a straight path, which means the claim the Earth is moving around the sun. You can never, ever, 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 ever bring up Newtonian gravity. It's not even possible. It's not even permissible. It's not on the table. It's inadmissible. Okay. And so, you're coping pretty hard if you're trying to convince yourself that you can still say mass attracts mass, you can't. So I think that we've established that, right? And then we can kind of transition into how this is going to apply. And I will say, if anyone on the panel, and obviously Alan and Toby, if you guys ever want to share like a paper, a section of a paper you have highlighted, whatever, you can just share the screen. You know how StreamYard works. And it'll pop up. but I think that we should go into, if everyone on the panel is cool with it, kind of transition into GPS. And I wasn't sure if we were going to get everyone on the show, so I didn't title it that, but it all is intertwined anyway. And what they use for GPS, what they claim to use for GPS satellites, and the physics and the equations and the mechanics, right? And see exactly how does that comport with the requirement of this heliocentric model's claim. And it gets very interesting. And I will say, of course, we've heard people run around claiming GPS proves the globe and debunks flat Earth. It's so easy to debunk flat Earth. All you have to do is pull your phone out, and GPS debunks it. Right? We've heard that for a long time. We've also heard of like the proof of relativity is that GPS has to account for time dilation. All right, so let's see what's actually under the hood. And you may be surprised that with basically everything they claim to be evidence of the globe model, right? When you actually investigate it, it ends up not only being evidence for the globe model, it ends up being evidence directly contradicting and refuting the model. So cool. So you guys tell me if where you want to start with any of that, or if you guys have any input kind of to what I said. And
Yeah, I got something to add on to what you said before we completely move on to GPS, and it's in regards to Newton's equations and how they apply them to the sky. So what they don't tell you about Kepler's laws and Newton's laws and how they're covariant, they'll say, well, Newton's dynamic description of gravity, describes the solar system, right? Because Kepler's laws are just kinematics. So they take their big G calculation and they're like, okay, well, now we've got a dynamic description of the solar system using the concept of when we let something go on Earth, it falls to the ground at a certain rate, right? So they took that, applied it to the sky. But what they don't tell you is that the way that they derive all that is purely kinematic as well. And it's based off of empirical observation, because the orbits and all that are derived, or they're proportional to the cube of the radius of the orbit. So all you need is a constant and the periodicity of the event you're watching, and you could mathematically extrapolate by canceling out the mass and just getting the answer you need by calculating the quote unquote angular velocity of the orbit, right? So how fast something moves across the sky in arc seconds. They just they just use math to backwards derive everything they need to about the quote unquote mass of that, because it's just an algebraic calculation that's based off of kinematics and periodicity and constants. So what you were touching on about the Earth's orbit around the sun, how that would create a force that would be measured by interferometry. The fact that that isn't measured is why they had to redefine all of physics, because they knew that there would be a direct proportional relationship measured with velocity and light. Because they, prior to Michelson-Morley, like in the early 1800s, 1850s, throughout there, they did a lot of work with light and interference patterns and translational motion to derive the speed of light and how much a fringe pattern would, how you could relate a fringe pattern to a proportional velocity amount. So by the time they got to Michelson-Morley, they knew exactly what they were doing and what they were trying to measure. And when they got a fringe shift pattern that didn't confirm the Copernican principle, so they needed 30 kilometers a second, they needed their fringe to produce a proportional relationship with 30 kilometers a second, and they got 6 kilometers a second. And they were like, oh, snap, what do we do, boys? So it sent everyone into panic. And then that's when Einstein had to come along and say, well, you know how we're circling around the sun on this great circle orbit. Well, check it out, homies. We're actually traveling in a linear path, and space-time's curved due to the displacement of space-time due to the gravitational field of the sun, right? So that's where they get into all these different perspectives here. And then what we're going to talk about with GPS is another direct falsification of that concept, right? Because they say that we have two types of motion, essentially, right? The motion that we see from our perspective, where things are going around a curve and doing circles and ellipses around us, right? But that's actually not what's happening. It's traveling in a straight line. It's just curved from our perspective because of space-time curvature. So that's how they relate everything, and they say that you can't measure that linear motion, blah blah blah. But we'll get in. There's experiments where they do, but specifically with GPS, it falsifies this concept, because the acceleration and deceleration periods that correspond to this quote unquote universal reference frame that we would see motion through if we could see an outside perspective of our system doesn't exist, and the deceleration and acceleration corrections to satellites, or to the atomic clocks in satellites, correspond to a geocentric Earth in an actual elliptical orbit around, local to us. Like as we see it, it's happening in the sky. There's no fictitious reference frame that's actually responsible for everything. So just wanted to touch on that real quick before we move on.
Nice.
Yeah, well said. Can I tack on to just like as Alan said really well, it's just kinematics, but it's disguised as dynamics. The trick they did with equating masses based on that proportional scaling relationship, it's a trick, but it's just a purely kinematic description of what's happening in the sky. But there's a reason the reason people don't want to let go of it is because of the indoctrination. I mean, we've had mobiles since our head when we were a baby, right? Like Earth revolves around sun, magical forces, and we're taught that with cartoons, in school, like since preschool, this stuff is everywhere, and so it's easy for people to pull that out, right? It's internalized very deeply in people's psychology about orbital math and Copernican, the simple heliocentric math. That's all deeply ingrained. But, people don't want to go to Einstein because most people, they're old enough when they learn about Einstein and what he said and speed of light being constant and stuff, if they're the type of person that's contemplated that sort of thing. When they get to that point, they kind of can tell, like, what? Like, this is weird. Like, no one wants to defend that because it's intuitively, it's intuitively kind of paradoxical. So in any case, I just wanted to say, like, the reason people are so stuck to this Newtonian gravity and they have to have it and they have to defend it, even though it's been debunked numerous times and it's, doesn't work with heliocentricity, essentially. They have to stick to it.
Yeah, I was looking into orbital mechanics years ago, and all I did, I got through the index page, and I was like, most of this stuff is all corrections and algorithmic calculations for how to kind of guess at what you're doing here. None of it seemed, hard fact anything to me. I didn't even get into the book, really. I was like, well, this is just all Narnia. This is like learning about Star Wars, like how a lightsaber works. It's not real. Yeah, so I didn't even really get into the book. I'm glad there's people out there like you guys that can actually understand this stuff and took the time to learn it so you can show people that it's nonsense. Me, I saw it and I was like, man, it's not a waste of time, but it's not teaching me anything more about how this place works. It's breaking down, the fake construct, which is just as important.
Wasn't that such a...
I was going to say real quick, whenever I read a lot of these papers, if I read a couple of them, I need to like detox afterwards. Like I need to read a different paper or find something that's not so insanely fallacious just to like clean myself off.
I feel dirty.
Wasn't that so telling though, that people that are not like, let's just call it like it is, right? People will say flat earth is like a niche group of people, like sort of. I mean, I'd say we're probably popping up around 20% solid right now. That's what I think. I think we're at a solid 20% across the board right now, like solid. And there's probably more. There's a lot of people feel like they can't say it. A lot more people that are like, it could be. I'll have to say, sure, we're not majority or anything, maybe, but there's a group that's really zealous against us, and they are super niche, right? Like they are like less than 1%. Like the people that like feverishly fight against us or people that have alternative cosmological opinions and positions, they're really small minority, random, like just crazy group of people, right? Like all that to say, those
they
people
just make shit up. They get away with anything. It's like, at least when we talk to real scientists or physicists or something, they can't afford to put their reputation on the line by just being outright liars.
Exactly. And that group of people that are fighting so hard and they want the globe so bad, those people, it's very profound to notice that they cannot accept or even articulately defend relativity. Like the point that Toby just made is very profound if you actually think about it. Like that even them, they know that that belief system is so convoluted and it doesn't resonate with them whatsoever. They can't even convince themselves it is legitimate to such an extent that they prefer to defend Newtonian gravity, even though it's just not even on the table anymore. It's like almost 150 years out of date. You know, so people say it's over 100 years old. It's almost 150 years. And because you got, 2024, you have 1887. And it's just wild. It really kind of paints the picture here. What you have to believe in to hold on to the heliocentric model is so counterintuitive and antithetical to experience that someone that desperately wants to believe in it can't even get themselves to the place that they can publicly defend it. And we're talking about people that have monetary incentive to do so, which I don't even want to talk about. It's going to make me mad again.
Do you know how famous that person would get to be able to do something Neil deGrasse Tyson couldn't do, or Bill Nye, all these, famous people that are supposedly so smart, if they could just prove the globe once and for all and shut up all these flat earthers?
Well, it's funny, like if one of us were to fake an experiment, let's say Austin faked an experiment, he would get hung and quartered for doing that. Whereas I was asking these guys, FTFE, and these, what do you think about Stephen Hawking faking his experiment? They're like, we don't care. It's still,
No big deal.
So I'm like, okay, so now you've just proven that you'll accept lies as long as they push the globe. I mean, you have no morals. You're not like, oh yeah, that shouldn't be done. Oh, we shouldn't be lying about that. It's just, we don't care. The Earth's a globe. They can do whatever they want. But it's like, okay, you would have hung Austin, and he has would have had 7,000 views, and then a channel that has millions of views, you're like, it's okay if that guy lies. It's like, you're so backwards. They're such degenerates.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy, bro. And yeah, I mean, like, they have ample incentive to be like that, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's whatever.
Yeah,
I know, but your soul, man, that's gotta weigh on people.
You have to believe in one, though.
Yeah, that's why they are such staunch atheists, most of them, because the alternative is, then you do have to worry about it.
Yeah, exactly. By the way, supposedly maybe a pretty big creationism debate I may be partaking in soon. But all right, so yeah, I think that was a very good point, and make sure everyone understands what Alan's saying is, like, even to determine a lot of these masses, they just basically reverse engineer it. They assume this gravitational relationship. They look at the periodicity and the kinematic, motions and relationships, and then they just start reverse engineering masses and plugging them in. Science. So, okay, now, like, I do think it's very interesting to tackle GPS, and in a way, I wish it's my fault I didn't reach out to everyone soon enough, but I wish I had put in the title, because I would like to really bury it. It is so frequently misrepresented and used, and let's go ahead and toss Jeran his flowers real quick. He's been pointing out for a long time, oh well, it's closed sourced. So the actual accurate GPS data, it's not open source. So if you needed to make exclusive or important changes, say in the South, you could do so effortlessly. No one would ever know. And give us access to that information. We'll tell you exactly what's going on.
Right. That's the answer, is right there.
Yeah. So, like, what's up with that? And they have a cover story for it. Like, the pro of me dealing with these people so much is, like, I know all their arguments. The most apologist argument is like, oh, well, the military has to make sure that they still have, positioning advantages, and they can't give all their information away, blah, blah, blah.
Well, then I heard somebody say too, they're like, oh, they can't give that away because then they'll know where the satellites are in space. Like, I thought that they track all that orbital stuff. So what are you doing now that nobody knows where our satellites are? Come on. It's all these stories that just don't jive.
Yeah, it's crazy. So, all right, I don't know where we should start. Obviously, that's a good place right there. It's like, well, okay, let's just be honest. You can transform the information. You can transform coordinate systems from a flat Earth to a globe, and then you can hide these transform data, charts. And by making it closed source, no one would actually know that you're doing it. No one would be able to pin down exactly what you're doing. I mean, that's what's happening. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that when the world record in the South for the sailboats is 4 knots and the boat goes 35 knots and the world record in the North is way faster than that something's not adding up. The same with the distances and times and alleged speeds of the planes in the south, and there's no intercontinental undersea cables from south to south. And you got like people like fight tight shirts like, oh, because it's easier to go up and through the land. Like, no, they still go across water, you clown show. Like they would, like, what are you talking about? Like,
let's make up anything. Nobody wants to take a cruise across the Southern Ocean. Like my dad will go on a cruise anywhere. Doesn't care where it is. He just wants to be on a boat and gamble and eat. So it's like,
and it's some of the most beautiful tropical climates in the world are below the equator.
And then if people got to like go by the Antarctica and take a look and go by the ice fields or something, I mean, they just act like it. No, nobody wants to take that trip. No, there's a reason why there's no cruises down there.
Right. Yeah, all of a sudden capitalism doesn't care about money.
Right.
So I think that's very telling, right? The southern differences, and that's where we know that the major differences would be very noticeable and unavoidable. And then when it comes to GPS, that would be a major thing that they're hiding. And that's certainly my position. But frankly, it's simple. You can transform from the flat to the globe thing. That's not a problem. You can transform it.
Yeah.
That's it. You just get the data over a plane and you transform it to a predetermined globe coordinate system. So that part of it is not complicated at all. That's what people typically invoke it to verify. Like, oh, well, it would only work on the globe. And then they want to pretend they're really smart because they understand basic trigonometry. Like, I can assure you that anyone that's actually really, really smart, they would never flex that they can do basic trig. Like, that's not how it works, bro. So anyway, we get the trigonometry argument, and it's not understand coordinate transforms. So that part of it we can kind of set aside because the real important meat of it, I think, extends just beyond that. And so I kind of want to toss the ball over to Toby or Alan, wherever you guys think would be a good point to break some of this down. But I think this is very important stuff for people to kind of digest, and it may take a bit of repetition.
Yeah, awesome.
You're here. Oh,
nice.
Got it. Permission.
Shout out to Eru, dude. He set the standard for organization and research and all that.
Hey, shout out. What's up, my boy? What's up, brother?
How you doing?
Eru.
Hello, guys. I was in my brother's birthday after 3 years. I always arrive at middle of February, and I was sharing with my family a few moments. So sorry for the delay.
No problemo.
I'll forgive you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's all good, brother. So, and give you a quick recap. We basically talked about how, according to Michelson Morley, the interferometer would have detected the Earth circling around the sun. It didn't do that. And so they had to update the model and invoke Einsteinian mechanics, say that the Earth's actually going in a straight path that's free falling. And that's why they couldn't detect it. So Newtonian gravity is not even an option in their paradigm. It's not like, well, it kind of works. Oh, they're the same. Oh, blah, blah, blah. No, it's not an option. And we cover that quickly because we're transitioning into GPS. So at any point in time, of course, like everyone else in the panel, bro, if you got anything you want to present or throw in regarding GPS, we're going to kind of bury the claim that GPS only works on this spinning globe and show that actually the opposite is true.
Okay, we have Alan here, so he's a specialist in GPS.
Well, thanks for the kind words. But I've read a couple of PDFs on it, so I got a presentation queued up. So to get to kind of start on the baseline of what Austin was talking about, like, okay, these transformation equations, you could apply it to a globe, you could apply it to a triangle, a rectangle, doesn't matter what we live on. The way that GPS derives a distance, it can transform that distance to any coordinate system, local, it doesn't matter, right? The idea behind it is that it would specifically be invariant under any transformation required. So any coordinate system, they can get a distance, they can apply it, and then it'll work. Okay, so how do they accomplish this feat? That's pretty incredible. How do they do that? Well, it starts with an atomic clock, two atomic clocks really on board a satellite, right? So to get into the process of how they sync an atomic clock first, we'll kind of illustrate the back end of GPS and how they do everything, right? So we got a diagram of an atomic clock here. And if you look at it, you'll see that there's a cesium oven. So that's where they keep their liquid cesium. And then as it heats up, it releases vapor. And that vapor gets channeled out and to a magnetic field where it gets further channeled into a what do they call this? The radio resonance cavity or chamber, right? And in this chamber, they have cesium at a specific, it's oscillating at a specific frequency, 9,192,000,000 oscillations per second. And then in this chamber here, they're sending a radio wave to get it to bounce off of the cesium to make it to get it to be in alignment with it. So they need the radio frequency to be the same frequency as the cesium. So when they're bouncing off of each other, that's when they're the same oscillation rate. And when they hit that oscillation rate, they exit the chamber through another magnetic field where anything that's not oscillating at that 9,192,000,000 gigahertz oscillation rate, they kick out. And then when it's in the right alignment for that, it gets sent to an ionizer. They then ionize that, and that gets sent to an oscilloscope essentially, and they call that an electron multiplier, and that's just bouncing the signal that they convert from the ionization of that resonant frequency to an electric signal, and that's where they get a frequency of 9,192,000,000 oscillations per second. So they can break 1 second down to 9,192,000,000 of a second, and then from that they take the rate at which electromagnetic waves propagate. So they take C, that value, and they take a time difference from when the signal is sent to when the signal is received. So whatever is carrying this, whatever distance this is up in the sky, whatever the satellite craft is, it's carrying these, and it's encoding all of its time information with it, and it sends out radio signals that get received on the ground. And those signals have all the necessary information in them about the coordinate system in which they originated from, so that your handheld device can convert that and tell you where you're at on the globe. So the Earth must be a globe, right? And these satellites must be, infinity distance out in the sky and all that stuff or whatever, right? So the way that it works, they have meridian corrections built into the signal and into the receiver. So when this atomic clock is going around, when this satellite is, traveling around the Earth, it's actually deleting time from it. So in doing that, it's deleting distances. So when it's crossing meridians, it's basically conforming to the globular coordinate system. So what's actually happening is they take the ECI reference frame. They have all these satellites going around. So I have a diagram here. We have our center point of the ECI at the North Pole. Extending outwards, we have satellites at different locations, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, these are all satellites that are going in some circular path, doesn't matter, right? And they're keeping in contact where they're keeping their location, their true location is in reference to the center of the coordinate system, right? Of their coordinate system. So they're keeping all their information. They're relaying it back to their central place in Colorado or wherever it is, and they know where they're at on the coordinate system, where that satellite's at. Now, that satellite is then sending out signals of where it's at on the fictitious coordinate system, and all the information scaled invariantly to put the satellite at a distance of 22,000 kilometers, right? Because it's obviously not 22,000 kilometers high. It's not 13,000 miles in the sky. It's much closer, but it's sending information encoded with it, with that signal, to say, hey, I'm at this location on this fictitious coordinate system. And then it takes that time that it was propagated, right? And your GPS receiver, your phone, whatever, what have you, will calculate everything based on that time propagation, and it'll put you on the globe. That's how the entire system works. So you have like a shadow coordinate system, I call it, that the clocks and the GPS are all referencing their location to, and then they're sending out globular coordinate systems that scale invariantly to that, so that when you get your device, it decodes that information, and it's like, okay, cool, this satellite that's 22,000 kilometers up just told me where I'm at on the globe, and it seems to be pretty accurate, right? So the natural inclination is that, okay, we're on a globe. And then when you get into the GitHub source code stuff like Jeran was talking about earlier, you can't really extrapolate anything out of that, because it's not going to be useful for deriving the actual locations and the actual corrections that they put into these things. So they sweep up everything too, all this back-end stuff, all these corrections on the back end, they sweep this up under what's called the Sagnac correction. So they say that because the Earth's rotating, there's a deviation in the time or whatever, so they have to account for that. So any velocity corrections that they're making, any changes that they're making, any meridian corrections that they make, all get swept up under the quote-unquote Sagnac correction due to Earth rotation. And so after the transformation, after they take their measurements where they show that the speed of light is different and it's at a different location and all that, and they transform that from the ECI reference frame to the ECEF reference frame, the one that they say that we live on, they have They just sweep it up under a Sagnac correction, and poof, you're on a globe. So that's a quick summary of where we're at with that, without getting too into detail of how the satellites themselves falsify relativity by their clocks losing time proportional to their own velocity. But that was just an overview of how the entire system works. So now we can get into the relevance of the orbital mechanics of it and how that falsifies the Newtonian concept of mass attracting mass and all that. Is there anything
Nice,
that
very
anyone
cool.
wants to
Let
add
me
on?
let me just throw this in.
Mhm.
If anyone has questions, Alan's very familiar with the subject, and so he's conveying it very efficiently. And don't be embarrassed to say, "Wait, I didn't catch that. Wait, I got some questions." It's easier for us if you guys at GLOBEBUSTERS or at me in the Rockfin or YouTube chats and ask your questions. That way we can kind of facilitate them to ensure understanding.
We have some people saying that Alan's volume's a little low. So I don't know if you can get closer, eat your microphone or something.
Yeah.
But thank you to Flatters Baller. Says, when Alan talks, I can barely hear him. His volume's very low. Jeran has crushed GPS on his show many times. Keep it up, guys. Thank you.
I'm also turning him up on StreamYard, so maybe don't go too over the top.
Okay.
Yeah, I moved it a little closer and adjusted the angle that I was coming in at. So maybe it's fine now.
Sounds better to me. Yeah.
You're way better now. I turned you up to 160.
Okay, cool.
I see one
sorry
in
about
chat. It says, explain how GPS signal is faster east to west.
Well, he's asking the globe troll in the chat that.
Oh, okay.
But
Oh, it
yeah, I
was
mean that will for sure come up, right, Alan?
Yeah.
Yeah. So go ahead.
I was going to say real quick, Alan, I don't know if you were going to get into the story, but just are you going to talk about the data that was analyzed once by university and they found that it was already all transformed? So just to go into what Alan was saying, like they tried to, you'd think, oh, well, if it's closed source, maybe we can just look at the data and analyze that and draw some conclusions about that. But when they actually went to do that, the data they received was already all transformed.
Yeah, that was Wolf and Pettit from 1995. Yeah, they were testing the anisotropy of the speed of light, so they had this bright idea that they would go to Colorado and look at the raw GPS data that gets collected at the whatever that institution's called where they save it all. And so they were given access to the data, and they found that it already was Sagnac corrected to show that the speed of light is c equals c, and they were like, okay, nothing to see here, boys, let's pack it up. And
wow.
Yeah, dude, it was. Let me pull up the paper here. It's
Wolf. And let's just make sure. I mean, if you're out there, like, what are you thinking when you hear something like that? Like, why can't you get the raw data that shows that corrections are required? Why is it all already transformed at the first accessible data?
Because we're all liars, we're all grifters.
Yeah, these lads right here, P. Wolf and G. Pettit. The relativistic theory for clock synchronization and the realization of a geocentric coordinate time. So yeah, they were analyzing the signal propagation, like the timing, because it's a time.
Oh.
I lost him.
Yeah, me too. I didn't know if it was me. Alan, we lost you, bro.
At least the audio.
Yeah.
Alan?
It's too close to the microphone. He entered into another dimension.
Okay.
I saw that you unmuted, but I still can't hear you. Maybe something unplugged or something.
I don't know.
So is it GPS? Do you think that any part of GPS is, hanging from balloons possibly or something like that? Or do you think it's all land-based?
Oh, I think there's stuff in the sky as well. I don't think it's even necessarily all on a balloon. I mean, I think that for sure we get data and signals from balloons, and they have like entire groups of balloons that they're constantly kind of like, imagine if you put a balloon up every day. Well, then, balloons will fall down occasionally, but you still have tons of balloons up there. Right.
And I think Weiss describes it. I mean, I think he's got a good point when he says, couldn't the planes that are above you be creating a wire, like a mesh network? I think it's highly possible that, you just like you piggyback off your phone for a hotspot, Basically, maybe all the flying planes are hotspots. Just an idea.
Yeah.
That's pretty
Uh,
interesting.
Real quick, kind of a slightly different topic, but just off of what Alan was saying earlier about the atomic clocks. And maybe he's going to get into this still. Hopefully he can get his mic fixed. But it's funny, you guys are talking about lies and how there's no problem with lies, but like it's so much worse than that, even because in 1905, on the electrodynamics of moving bodies, the big paper, like Albert Einstein's, when he drops when he promotes relativity from theory to postulate, the whole thing is based on, he literally says the phrase, based on this imaginary physical experiment. And the imaginary physical experiment he invokes is you take a couple of different clocks, you take, I think, 3 different clocks, and you sync them all to the same time. And then when those clocks move around, even though there's no such thing as absolute time, because that's the whole point of this whole thing is that there's no such thing as absolute time, you'll be able to go back to those atomic clocks or those clocks, and they'll all be in sync with each other. And so even though there is no absolute time for you to work with, you can just use those clocks, and those will be like your kind of your absolute time or whatever. The problem was with the atomic clock that Alan just showed and explained, they don't stay in sync. When they move around on the Earth, they go out of sync, which we'll get into a bit more about the proportional relationship of east versus west with the preferred directionality of light. They decay relevant to that. So, Einstein says, oh, we can just take this imaginary physical experiment. Time's totally relative. There's no such thing as absolute time. And then when they go to put it to practice, everything starts going out of sync, and they have to sync everything back to absolute time. They use the sidereal time of the stars. So like the whole premise of 1905 on the electrodynamics of moving bodies, where relativity goes to postulate, is based on an imaginary thing that didn't even play out in reality.
Nice.
Testing.
We got you. Yeah, it's all good. I'll allow it.
Yeah. So, what part did it cut out at?
Like as soon as you pulled the paper up and you started to try to describe it, you read the title of it, and we
Nice.
lost you. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Yeah. So, title of the paper was Wolf and Pettit, Relativistic Theory for Clock Synchronization and the Realization of a Geocentric Coordinate Time. And what they were doing there is they were analyzing.
Share your screen.
Oh, sorry. They were analyzing the anisotropy of the speed of light, or the assumed, and they found that their data set was already Sagnac corrected on the back end. So they went to go get the highest form of raw data possible, and it's already Sagnac corrected on the back end. So there's no such thing as like raw GPS data. It's already been rawly corrected at the highest level of that can be accessible by the public. So we'll never know like where these meridian corrections, like how much distance are they taking off on a meridian correction, right? We'll never know.
Yeah, for sure. It's such a great point, bro. Like they make these meridian corrections and no one would possibly know how massive of a correction that you're making, and boom, there you go. Like truth in plain sight, you would never know.
Yeah, they're like, oh, I just took this plane flight and looked, it confirmed, GPS told me exactly how long it took the plane to get. It's like, yeah, dude, but have you met my friend Meridian Correction? So when you get on a plane, it's always going to tell you that the plane went exactly where it needed to go to get you on the, to be on the globe. If there is a global deception going on, it wouldn't make sense if they didn't do that, right? So, just stuff to consider, man. Because when you get into the fact that they're making these first order velocity corrections to electromagnetic propagation to change things, I mean, that right there on the face of it falsifies special relativity. And then the fact that this is a time interval system based on the supposed constancy of it. So now you're already admitting to changing the constancy of it. So we can't rely on those distances, like, of course it's going to work out on a globe. It's corrected to be on a globe.
Exactly. Like if you just assume that whatever error exists, the way that you determine it's an error is based on your assumptions of C and the globe coordinates, then you're obviously just going to be always making those corrections to get the final output that match the globe. I mean,
yep,
that is such basic stuff there, right?
Yep. I was talking to some people that work in GPS, like that work on the handheld receivers and stuff. And they're like, well, listen, man, everything that I plug into this device and tell it how to interpret satellite data, it's telling me that this is a globe, you know? so it's like, how do you argue with that? And it's like, well, are you aware that there's meridian corrections built into it, and there's like a shadow coordinate system that it's referencing its true location on, and it's sending you a scaled invariant coordinate system to put you on a globe? And it's like, well, that's very interesting. I hadn't considered that, you know, because you can look up the meridian corrections in the clock standards, like in the GPS standards and all this stuff. This isn't just like some stuff that they, you know, thought about doing and it didn't really work out. This is the standard. Meridian corrections are the standard for how GPS works.
Yeah, and what's also very crazy, man, is I don't know if you guys ever met. I think his name was Mapmaker on Discord, but he was like using certain professional connections to like try to pull the raw GPS data of these plane flights, and he was getting dangerously close to some stuff, and that dude just went MIA.
Yeah, you're talking about Model Builder.
Model Builder, yeah.
Yep, yeah.
Disappeared
upon him,
bro. Yep. Everyone was like, "Bro, you're being really public about some of this." You know, like we're like, this is like, if what you're saying is true, and you're gonna come back with some of this stuff, you need to be
See the guy with the flights that said that the flights are moving way faster?
Yep.
Yes, and he was like trying to compile the actual GPS data, the raw data, to prove it. And yeah, he's in MIA, bro.
Wow.
Yeah, he had their uncorrected speed on it. So like, you know how we say, well, with the air currents and whatnot, the planes will be going 800, 900 miles an hour. Well, he had those speeds on his thing, man, before they were corrected. And then
I found that paper that said that I don't remember if it was 60s or 50s that they're talking about the jet streams. They know them real well, and they said that the jet stream goes to 350 miles per hour.
Oh no, I didn't hear about that. Could you send that to me though? Because I'm actually putting together some Coriolis jet stream situation, so I need a collection of that. That would be super helpful. Thank you. Yeah, kind of forgot where we were at on that.
Well, we haven't really gone into the. Go ahead. If you have a thought, go ahead.
I was gonna say, yeah, the jet stream stuff. So he had all that. He went public with it a couple times, and then he started looking into interferometry. He was going to be our interferometer guy because he was actually an engineer and all that stuff. So he was super familiar with it. He started doing tests with interferometry, and then that's when he went missing. So.
Yeah, pretty crazy. I just throwing that out there. Like, GPS seems to be their baby, right? And there is way too much secrecy. It's very simple, bro. If everything's on the up and up, the Earth's a spinning globe, and relativity is correct, and C is correct, it should just work all the time. There should be no meridian corrections. You should have no problems. I mean, you're already cooking the books with the very engineering of atomic clocks and the way that they self-correct based on like frequency manipulation. You should have like complete accuracy and efficacy. The fact that there are corrections is a major problem for you guys. Like the fact that you guys come and grab the final output and you're like, look, after we fixed it, it worked. Yeah. Okay, cool. We're talking about how it shouldn't need to be fixed. And it's required corrections. Right. So surely people are understanding this point.
I sent you out.
Thank you, sir. All right, now do we want to get into what you were talking about originally with the falsification of the orbital mechanics? Now that we've kind of touched base on how the atomic clocks works and how they keep time.
Sure. Yeah. I love that topic. And I'm going to still be listening, but I have to walk over here and grab something real quick. But I love this part of it. Again, let me reiterate this. Rockfin or YouTube, at me or at GLOBEBUSTERS or whatever, and ask any specific questions while you have them, so we can kind of not get too ahead of you and, you know, answer your questions, because we want to make sure everyone can kind of digest this information. I know it can seem a bit overwhelming, but when you really start to understand it, it's not too bad.
Yep. Okay, so what we were talking about earlier, GPS's functionality is all contingent on what's called GPS time. So these atomic clocks have to keep a very specific time, which is it's called GPS time. So all these have to be in sync. Some of these clocks are in motion. Some of them are affixed to the Earth. So they have to make corrections to the clocks to keep them all in sync. So Originally, Einstein clock synchronization was put forward as the method by which they would synchronize their clocks. Where's my clock synchronization slide? Oh, right here. Okay, so the original Einstein theory was, say you have a stationary clock at A, and you have a moving clock, two moving clocks. I'm sorry. You have a satellite craft with a clock fixed on it, clocks A and B, right? How do you sync this moving clock to the stationary clock? Well, the Einstein theory was that because the speed of light is the same, this is how you would do it. You would have your stationary clock, and your moving frame would move past it. Now, when clock alpha and clock beta are on the moving craft, right? They're on the moving frame. So when clock alpha intersects with clock alpha sends a signal to clock beta with its time that it's sending its signal minus a half-time correction. So their assumption here is that the speed of light is the same going there and back. That value that they give for C is the same for the one-way speed, because they get into some ambiguities with the one-way speed, and they're like, one-way speed, I don't know. Can we measure it? Maybe we need a resonance cavity. I don't know. So there's different answers that they give, but this is all predicated on the speed being the same on the one-way. Okay. So what would happen here is that clock would get its signal. It would go, okay, it was sent at this time, half the time of the propagation. We'll go ahead and deduct that, and then it'll display its time, and magically, not magically, but in theory, this time would be the same as clock alpha, and clock alpha would be the same as clock A on the ground. So they would all be in sync, and then from there, this moving clock should be in sync with the stationary clock in perpetuity, because the speed of light is the same, and a satellite is free falling around the Earth. They call that a local inertial frame. So they say that because it's falling around the Earth, it's a local inertial frame. And remember what Einstein says about inertial frames and inertial observers, the speed of light is constant for inertial observers. So technically what should be happening here is that these clocks should not lose synchronicity. This light should just be bouncing back and forth between them. We've all seen that light clock diagram where the light's bouncing back and forth. That should be happening here in perpetuity forever. And there should be no desynchronization, let alone desynchronization based on the velocity of this craft with respect to nothing. Because remember, it's falling around the Earth in a vacuum, so it has no way to reference its actual velocity unless it has other references from the ground, right, to give it that velocity. But what they found actually is that these clocks, while they're free falling around the Earth, is that they start losing time proportional to their own velocity. And they have to make corrections to that. And so what's happening here is, as this signal is bouncing back between clock A and B to keep synchronous time, there's a retardation that's happening that's proportional to the overall velocity of the moving system. So instead of light moving back at this fixed speed, it's going, oh, I got to go a little slower for some reason. I don't know why, but I just have to go slower. Okay, so that's causing the clocks to go out of sync, so they have to correct for that. And that right there, that clock synchronization leads to another problem, because they tell us that the Earth is free falling around the sun, right? That it's in a free fall orbit around the sun, and we can't detect its a velocity component out of it using interferometry or anything like that, because there's for some reason there's no retardation. But when this clock is falling around the Earth, they say it has to correct for its velocity completely. So. And then it's like in reference to what? So in relativity theory, there's relative motion. It has to be in relative to what? With respect to what? Well, this clock is free falling around the Earth in reference to the center of the ECI reference frame. Well, the center of the ECI reference frame is a mathematical construct. It doesn't exist. A clock can't physically be falling around a mathematical construct that doesn't exist, and then it's referencing its time in reality through that. That's illogical. So what's actually happening is that there's an absolute time, there's an absolute space, and motion through that is retarded proportionally. That shows up in the velocity in the speed of light, the same way it does in sound and all other waves, where the speed of their propagation is relevant to their observer's velocity. The same way that sonar works in water with a moving observer, the speed in which that wave hits the moving observer is going to be dependent on that observer's motion through the water. So the implication here is that this satellite, wherever it is accounting for its own velocity as it goes through the Earth, and there's no There's no other reference frame where they say like, okay, it's free falling, but it's actually a linear path due to curved space-time around the Earth. And if you were on a different reference frame, you would see it, traveling in a straight line. Well, funny you mentioned that. We have a cycloid orbit depicted here from a different reference frame. So if you were on Mars, for example, you would see a satellite not doing an elliptical orbit. You would see it doing a cycloid. So the deceleration and acceleration periods would be different. So this clock, the corrections, it would retard differently, right? It would be in accordance to that universal special relativity premise reference frame that, that exists. And that's not how the clock works. That's not how it retards. It's constantly retarding proportional to its own velocity. So there's the implication here is that if satellites prove anything, it's that the Earth is geocentric and not moving. Because again, if these additional velocity vectors existed, so when this clock is falling around the Earth, right, it's going to be parallel and perpendicular to these different planes of motion, because you know how they're always like, well, is the sun moving with respect to the center of the galaxy or to the cosmic microwave background, blah, 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 blah. They break it down into 5 different planes of motion. Okay, cool. So when a satellite's falling in orbit around the Earth, right, it's going to be parallel and perpendicular to those planes of motion. So Galilean velocity addition will have to apply, meaning you're going to have to take the velocity of that craft that's falling around the Earth, and you're going to have to add 30 kilometers a second to it when it's parallel and perpendicular to the plane of motion of the Earth going around the sun. When it's parallel and perpendicular to the plane of the sun and Earth moving around the center of the galaxy, 230 kilometers a second, it's going to have to add in another velocity correction for that. It doesn't. And then obviously 700 kilometers a second with respect to the cosmic microwave background. No corrections ever necessary. And this has been noted through, multiple people's careers in GPS. So we have some Chinese people here that were, wrote a paper about that, and they were like, hey, we never have to account for anything. For some reason, the only thing we have to account for while we're free falling in space is Earth's rotation, right? Because they actually say that from their free fall orbit, one of their corrections is a velocity component in regards to Earth's rotation. So obviously that's an ether wind correction, but they're saying that Earth's rotation is affecting the clock synchronization as it falls around the Earth. That's crazy. So this guy's saying, hey, so Ching Chong Su here in I think this was early 2000, was saying, hey, these clocks, we're correcting for that falling around the Earth, but why don't we have to correct it when it's going around the sun? Doesn't exist. That's really weird. Ron Hatch pointed out the same thing. It's been pointed out by other people. These corrections for these velocity components do not exist. And these have to exist to confirm heliocentrism. GPS would have to correct for these velocities if we were moving through, space like this in accordance in their own fictitious system, man. So where they've divided everything up into planes of motion, and if you're in alignment with that, well, even under that theory, it doesn't manifest in reality in the clock corrections. All right, so
there's a question in chat, Alan. This is from Heracles Sereno. $5 tip over on Rockfin. He says, would it be too big of a claim to say that preferred direction takes away the only dynamic model heliocentrism had left?
No, that's the point of it explicitly, because so when we get into this diagram right here for this east-west propagation variance, because we haven't even got into the signal variance, right? This is just how the clocks work. Right? So what he just pointed out there, say you have a signal going from New York to San Francisco and vice versa, it's actually faster going one way and going than it is going the opposite. So they say, okay, Sagnac correction for the Earth rotation. That's cool. Well, how about when you send a signal from New York to the North Pole, or whatever station would be, like when you're perpendicular to to that east-west vector, right? There's no difference. There's no variance. There's nothing. So to say that the reason that they're correcting this is because the physical object moved its location due to rotation is completely out of the question now.
Yeah.
Because if it's physically moving, well, it doesn't matter if it's going perpendicular to the vector of motion. It's still in a different spot. But they don't make any correction for that.
Yep, and you can't even explain it. Like, they have to invoke the magnetic field, because otherwise they would have to invoke absolute space, and you can't do that. Basically, in order to make these corrections, in order to make them make sense in reality, they have to do their transformations to bring it back to reality, right? But before they can do that, before they can say C is constant, say the speed of light doesn't change, and then transform it back to reality to make those things meet each other, to make that fantasy, quote unquote, meet reality, they have to assign a velocity vector to a point in space. They have to say this, this is the motion. These are the motions that are occurring. They have to, in their equation, they have to include velocity of the craft, and they have to use the speed of light. And the problem with that is, back to 1905, Albert Einstein on the electrodynamics of moving bodies, he says very explicitly, the introduction of a luminiferous ether will prove to be superfluous, in as much as the view here to be developed will not require an absolutely stationary space provided with special properties, nor assign a velocity vector to a point of the empty space in which electromagnetic processes take place. So Einstein does not agree with the way in which they have to even invoke this. Now, like I was saying, though, they invoke the magnetic field, which isn't that convenient, that they have no solid explanation for how magnetism works. So they don't have to invoke a velocity vector to a point in space, because they're invoking, a mathematical construct of a magnetic field. But it's still, the same premise, right? They have to invoke something absolute. They have to invoke a reality framework to then reference their transformation against to come back to reality. Because, regardless of whatever they want to say about the speed of light being constant in whatever reference frame they want, in the words, a joke me and Alan have is like, sorry, Mario, your princess is in another reference frame. Like, you just go, no matter what you do, you will never be able to substantiate relativity, because it's only substantiated in reference frames outside of reality, aka Fantasyland.
Yeah, and I'll give my take on the guy's question. And by the way, I will say we're prioritizing Rockfin questions. So, because if you guys don't know, of course, YouTube just recently demonetized me and ripped away all the memberships, and so we don't really support them, nor do we trust them. And we would really prefer you guys watch and support via Rockfin. Not that we'll leave you hanging completely on YouTube or anything, but we're going to prioritize the questions on Rockfin. And I want to clarify kind of the question to make sure everyone gets it. I think a bunch of people did, but he asked, would it be too big of a claim to say that the preferred direction takes away the only dynamic model heliocentrum had left? No, of course, just like Alan said, it is the whole point that we're making, is that when you look at MMX and, you got the Newtonian dynamic claim thrown out the window, now you have the relativistic Einsteinian claim. That is all they have. They have to have that. And this is taking that away. So then, yes, quite literally, the preferred direction for the clocks and the signals in and of themselves, etc., literally does take away the only dynamic claim that they had. I did just want to reiterate that we would prefer you guys move to Rockfin. Okay, sorry. Let's just continue on. Oh, wait. Actually, while we're doing this, while I've already paused this, we did get another tip. It says Novator ID. Thank you for the $10 tip on Rockfin, brother. Much love. Greatly appreciated. All right. Sorry about that. I just wanted to make sure. I think that the question is a good one, but it does require some prior knowledge, right? So I wanted to make sure people got it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I don't see any questions. I'm assuming that that means that either you guys are being distracted by this person that wants to keep on spamming some irrelevant nonsense he talks about everywhere, or you guys are understanding it. I do think it's very important that we do all kind of wrap our minds around this. So please, I encourage you guys one last time, if you have any questions, don't be embarrassed to ask, so we can kind of make sure everyone's getting it.
And even if you're not looking at this from a geocentrist point of view or a flat earth point of view or anything, you should just be curious why all of modern physics is leading us down this fantasy land. Like, why do we have to believe the speed of light is constant? Maybe you should ask yourself, where did this theory of relativity come from? What caused Einstein to derive this? And it's interesting when you realize it's literally when they tried to measure the motion of the earth. And that's why they had to say that the speed of light is constant. And that's why I'm talking so much about the 1905 paper, because that was their attempt to explain the lack of measurable motion in 1887 with the Michelson-Morley experiment. And it's crazy because the same thing that these globers will invoke to gaslight you, to make you feel like you don't understand what's really happening on the Earth, GPS, you go and look under the hood, and it's explicitly not relativistic. It uses explicitly classical mechanics, so much so that, like, you know, it can tell you where you are, you know, to down to the meter or whatever.
Down to the millimeter.
Yeah, it's amazing
On-
how precise it is.
On that first order measurement too. Just accounting for a humble C plus or minus V, you can get the accurate distance down to the millimeter using classical mechanics. And then they came around in 1995 and said, hey, all you engineers out there that are working on GPS and that have been coming up with these relativistic corrections that we're not implementing, hold tight, lads. As the sensitivity of our instruments gets better, we'll need to account for those corrections that we're ignoring. And right now, the reason we're ignoring them is because general and special relativity cancel each other out, because the sensitivity of our instruments, it doesn't really affect it. So, you know, we'll get in there eventually. And then they go over all of that and just kind of break down the instances where the equal gravitational potential of general relativity is canceling out the velocity corrections that would be needed by special relativity. And they're like, look, guys, like we really want to make relativity fit with GPS, but God dang it, it's just working so good right now. Like I just don't think we're going to do that. So there's a special note here at the end that I thought was funny from Carol Alley, who says, in that if one perhaps does the explicit recognition of special relativistic effects, I mean, it took a long time to get the general relativity down properly, but I think it is more or less correct now. But its absence of any explicit acknowledgement of special relativistic effects due to the speed of light being the same whatsoever, measured by an observer, leading to the principle of relative simultaneity and the associated Lorentz transformation physics. There's nothing of that at all in the current modeled system, and I think it should be. Thank you. Now, for those of you who don't know, the whole relativity on the face of it goes back to this principle of relative simultaneity, that two observers in relative motion, there can't be a cohesive chain of events based on their relationship, right? So they'll be out of sync. So basically what they're saying is, if the sun is moving around the Earth, right, and we're trying to measure it from our perspective on Earth, we're gonna get an amount of contraction that is directly proportional to our velocity around the Earth, such that we can't measure it, right? But if there's another person that's going like slower than, like, you know, just trailing behind us, that's slightly slower, the contraction that we measured, they're actually going to see it differently than the perspective of us on the Earth and what we measured, and from the perspective of the sun in relation to what we measured on the Earth. So there's no cohesive chain of events. It would all be relative to your velocity, and things would keep changing. Now, this is a big part of GPS, because if this were truly manifest, syncing everything to a cohesive timeline with GPS, you would be in a never-ending cascade of corrections based off of the velocity of the observer. It would work completely differently. They would have to account for this effect in some way. They couldn't have it all linked to a cohesive.
Do you think it would be even possible?
Yeah, you could do it with snapshots, I would say. Like they could snapshot it. It just wouldn't be as accurate, possibly. Like,
yeah, like you take the picture and you'll get it, 5 seconds or something like that after.
Yeah, I imagine that they could work it in to some degree of accuracy, but the fact that they did this whole system starting up with classical mechanics from the premise, right, and it obviously works off of syncing multiple events to a cohesive timeline. They never had to account for the principle of relative simultaneity, which is the entire crux of relativity theory at the high end of academics. When you get into arguing it or whatever, they're like, well, the principle of relative simultaneity, you can't really tell. And it's like, okay, well, if that were manifest, it would be in GPS, and it's not. So what's your next false premise that you're basing everything off of? So this is actually really devastating. This is huge. And if we have a minute, I'd like to read something from Ruyang Wang to kind of put that in perspective, because we all
Real quick before you
Mhm.
do, Adam.
Mhm.
Alan, sorry, I
You're good.
apologize. I was rollerblading with a guy named Adam the other night.
Dude, okay, you're good.
Yeah.
Excuse
Big
accepted. You were rollerblading. No worries. Go ahead.
Big shout out to Murray Cole over on Rockfin, $20 tip, and Matthew DeGregorio with a $5 tip says peace, and then Bradley Treholt tipped $50. Thank you all so much. Much appreciated.
Yeah, thank you, man, so much. That's very generous. Thank you guys for popping on over to Rockfin as well. If you guys did that, just to reiterate, obviously you can sign up for Rockfin. You have access to all premium membership, and it will swap over to premium. So to hear the end of the show today and the end of all the other shows after the fact, you have to be a member. But I would strongly encourage everyone signing up for a Rockfin account. It supports all the truthers there. You get access to all of them signing up. So anyway, there's that. Thank you guys for popping on over to Rockfin. And I'm just going to keep encouraging you guys, because I do know that when you first hear some of this information, it's easy to not maybe fully understand it. And I just want to encourage you guys, like, we're all friends here. It's no shame in being like, wait a minute, what do you mean by this? What do you mean by that? But it's all good if you guys don't want to. I would love that people really wrap their mind around it. I mean, I think that so far we're covering the fact that obviously the actual coordinate systems there's a transform in the coordinate systems from, like, say, a flat earth to a globe earth. You would never know. We have meridian corrections. That's actual closed source. We talked about how the atomic clocks actually have to correct for proportionate velocity. So they have C plus V, meaning, you can't just count for the quote unquote speed of light being constant. You actually have to add that to the velocity in which that clock is moving. You have to account for a preferred direction as well. And these are major variables that do not comport with the claim that the Earth is a spinning globe revolving around the sun whatsoever. And in order to claim that, you need relativity, as we covered in the beginning, to kind of lay the framework for all of this. That's a very quick and concise kind of recap of what we've covered for the most part so far, although I obviously left a ton of stuff out. But again, if you have any questions, just ask us in the chat, please. And okay, I'm going to toss it back over here. You guys.
All right, cool. So, real quick before we move on, the key principle, like one of the key principle, really, there's no other way to put it. So the key principle of relativity is based on this concept of relative simultaneity. That's their segue into proposing all this nonsense, and it isn't manifest in GPS. So Ruyang Wang breaks down the analogy that they give to us all, because we've all seen, when you're trying to look into relativity, they show you the train car, and they say, look, we have a stationary observer on a platform, and we have a moving observer that's in the middle of a train car, and we have a lightning strike that strikes both ends of the train car. How do we tell who sees the lightning strike first and all this stuff, right? So that's the analogy that we're all given, and we're going to see how that plays out in reality with GPS, because it's exactly the same thing. So this is global simultaneity versus relative simultaneity. Oh, another quick note on global simultaneity. So in relativity theory, they say all reference frames are equally valid and the laws of physics are the same everywhere, blah, blah, blah. Therefore, when you transform and do the mathematics, you can confirm that, through the math. Okay, cool. So why isn't there relative simultaneity on Earth? Well, they say that due to Earth's gravitational field, there must be some localized phenomenon causing global simultaneity. And outside of Earth's reference frame, that's when relative simultaneity applies. So, our bad on saying that it applies on Earth, but we're just going to call it global simultaneity and move away from the principle of relative simultaneity, but still apply the principle of relative simultaneity and talk about it as if that's what we're talking about when we talk about global simultaneity. So if that sounded super confusing, that's because it's meant to break your mind from them. Okay, so global simultaneity versus the relative of simultaneity. So in any debate about the speed of light, the problem of simultaneity is always a focus. Special relativity claims that the relativity of simultaneity, which states that two events occurring at two different places are viewed as simultaneous for an observer in a system, usually will not be simultaneous if viewed for an observer in another system. But contrary to this, simultaneity is key to the operations of GPS. GPS is a timing ranging system. It does not directly measure the distance between two places where events occur, i.e., signals transmitting and receiving occur. The measurement, It measures the difference of the two instances when these two events happen, and then the distance is calculated using the range measurement equation. So taking that known rate of c, snapshotting the time of when the signal was sent and when it was received, and taking that difference and getting that's your distance. So GPS, especially its space segment and its control segment, make huge efforts to establish and maintain GPS time. So that was that clock synchronization that we were talking about earlier, and maintaining that relationship so that there's a cohesive timeline for these events to even be synced to. Makes a huge effort to establish and maintain GPS time, or simply GPS system time, or simply GPS time. So this is in reference to how GPS keeps time. In a scope where GPS is applied, roughly a scope of a diameter of 50,000 kilometers or bigger. So this is, him thinking that the scaled invariant coordinate system that they deliver to us is the true orbital nature of these satellites. But so it's obviously not 50,000 kilometers, but we'll continue. So if one is using GPS, one is using GPS time. And remember, GPS time is synced to sidereal time. So, and therefore, the concepts of simultaneity of GPS, two events happening at two different places, and we have a coordinate system for that event. So this is x1, xyz1. Like this is one event happening, and then this next coordinate system is another event happening at a different location. And these two events are simultaneous if the time in event 1 is equal to the time in event 2. This is true no matter who the observer or receiver is, where the receiver is, what the status is, or what the speed is. This is the basic principle of operations of the principle of GPS. We call it global simultaneity. In the books about special relativity, the most commonly cited example about relativity of simultaneity is the example about the railway platform and the moving train. It says that two events, e.g. two strokes of lightning, A and B, which are simultaneous with reference to the platform, are not simultaneous with respect to the moving train and vice versa. But now, GPS receivers have been utilized extensively on railway platforms and moving trains, and the lightning at two different places, A and B conceptually is the same time as the emission of two GPS signals from a satellite or two DGPS stations. In fact, if two signals are emitted from two satellites or two DGPS stations at the same time, both GPS receivers on the railway and the GPS receiver in the moving train would acknowledge the two events of emissions of the signal to be simultaneous. Without this basic acknowledgement, the GPS receivers cannot function at all. So, maybe I stand corrected, Zach, when I said earlier they could probably work something in there on the back end. This Wang saying here wouldn't function at all if they had to account for relative simultaneity.
Yeah, it just seems like with all the different motions, that would be really tricky. Kind of like the three-body problem almost,
It would be a never-ending cascade of transformations to maintain a relative position between three observers. Once you introduce that third observer, and then it's a mess. So that's super significant to dismantling their paradigm, because here we have a paper in 1995 where GPS has been out for years now, and now they got all these engineers coming up with a way to implement general and special relativity into it, and they're like, I don't know, man, just hold tight, guys. When the instruments get better, we'll implement it later. So relativity is actually not reference frame dependent; it's technology sensitivity dependent.
Real quick too, just to add on to this, that was Ruyong Wang's paper he just went through, and Ruyong Wang understood GPS and wrote papers explicitly. He wrote one paper with Ron Hatch, who also exposed GPS, but he wrote papers exposing GPS and that the speed of light's not constant, and basically that that relativity is nonsense. But maybe that's kind of complicated. It's hard to explain why that linear velocity is important and how GPS explicitly shows the linear quote unquote velocity of light being variant. So what Ruyong Wang did later on, back in 2003, 2004, he took like a Sagnac interferometer, which is where you, like locally, you don't use GPS, you do it locally. You test kind of like a fiber optic gyro, you test the speed of light. But he did it with linear portions of the interferometer. So like on a local effect, you don't need to look to GPS. you take a fiber optic gyro and you introduce linear portions of the fiber core. And those linear portions, if you move those linear portions while you're taking your fiber optic reading, so there's a linear motion, the speed of light varies directly proportional to that linear motion. There you go. Alan just pulled it up. So, that's unequivocal. That's showing a linear motion being registered in the fringe shift, which is exactly what they say was impossible to have happened during the Michelson-Morley experiment. They knew exactly what they were doing. Alan laid it out. They understood the premise. They went to go measure it. They didn't get a measurement of it. So then they said, oh, well, it's a rotational vector, and the Earth's moving through this, magically linearized geodesic path. But then Ruyang Wang, even though, because he understood the GPS, he's like, all right, let's really, really illustrate this. And so he used these linear configurations of fiber optics to show that linear relationship being directly proportional. So like relativity is just nonsense, fairy tale land.
Yeah, let me real fast tell everyone we're gonna move over to Rockfin exclusively here in a few minutes. So if the mods will help us out and drop the Rockfin link, and you guys go ahead and start moving over there if you want to hear the end of it, the show. And to clarify, to make sure everyone understands what we're saying here, like there, yeah, just like you said, the excuse was, oh, well, actually, it's not moving in a rotational vector or a circular or curved path. It's actually going in a linear path, this geodesic path in space-time, and that's why the interferometer in MMX, Michelson-Morley, did not detect it. But then we come around here to the 21st century, and we have Wang showing that you absolutely can detect the linear velocity, and not only detect it, but it's the fringe shift is directly proportional to that velocity. I mean, there is no other explanation other than the fact that the linear motion itself is causing the fringe shift. It's directly proportionate to it, right? Like if there was any little wiggle room, they would try to be like, oh, well, no, it must be something else. They can't. It's directly proportional to the linear motion, which means you are detecting linear motion. So even without all these other dunks all over the face of relativity, if you go back to their original explanation, it's been falsified with experimentation at this point. Direct physical demonstration and measurement has shown you absolutely can detect the linear motion, right, with interferometry. Therefore, you should still, even the excuse they came up with, the post hoc rationalization and the ad hoc excuse they came up with to explain away why we didn't detect the orbit, doesn't even work. It doesn't even work anymore because the whole idea was like, oh, since it's going in a linear path and has a linear speed, that's why you can't detect it. That's incorrect. You could, right? You're going to see a fringe shift proportional to that linear path, which means to this very day, you go do Michelson-Morley, you should be able to detect the Earth flying through space. With or without an ether, with or without relativity, doesn't matter. You should detect it. And that's a major thin problem. Of course, the relativity can't even be adequately applied to the measurements. So yeah, I think everyone's getting it.
Yeah, well said, man. It's a pivotal thing when you connect it all together and you see that there's applicable technology in real time that explicitly operates in the face of what they tell us about relativity and our ability to measure Earth's motion. And it's very eye-opening. It's like, because they're not going to come out and tell you this, right? These papers have been out on the internet. You could track down the history of GPS and sift through it all and put it together. They're not going to tell you and be like, oh yeah, you're like, we're actually lying about it and it does falsify relativity. But when you put it all together and walk through it, you can't, it's hard to come out. It would be hard to come out on the other end and maintaining your relativistic viewpoint to go through all this and see the speed of light changes directly proportional to the observer. I mean, all the things that they explicitly say don't happen manifest in GPS to a degree that just makes relativity and Earth's motion like untenable.
Yeah, and a quick philosophical point on there real quick. People, scientists, people that do understand these premises that come to this point, this fork in the road, as I would call it, where you are faced with the fact that special relativity, GPS, all this stuff, it can't make any predictions. It's all done after the fact to cover up the fact that the speed of light changed. When you come face to face with that fact, and up to that point, you always believed, oh, relativity is covariant, meaning that it can actually make predictions. It actually has a meaningful value that we can use for technology or whatever. But then you realize it literally can't. And so you're faced with this fork in the road. Do I acknowledge the fact that relativity is not what I thought it was? And, maybe I have to question the world that I live in a little bit differently. Or I can accept the fact that relativity is real, even though it has no predictive value, and it can only be substantiated after the fact purely using mathematics. We can't step out of the reference frame of our reference frame to verify if it's real or not. So when you hit that fork in the road, you hit a philosophical fork. You either say, all right, I throw this out, or I religiously accept it. I'm making a philosophical decision that I would say personally, I think it's a religious decision. You're making a decision to accept something that you cannot prove.
Kind of like the electric field. I believe it is creating the downward vector, but I can't go anywhere where there isn't an electric field to verify that.
How dare you? No, that's entirely the crux of the issue, right? Like going all the way back to Newton and his spinning bucket. The laws of physics were derived in what they call the lab frame, like on an Earth that's stationary, non-moving, where we can derive and apply the laws of physics. And then when we get into describing a rotating frame, things change, right? So the implication there is like, well, we have to make all these determinations about the laws of physics from other frames, but it has to be backwards compatible. In other words, it has to be covariant with this thing called the lab frame, which the implication is that it's stationary, non-rotating, and no matter what experiment is conducted, the sensitivity and the air tolerance in regards to how inertial the Earth needs to be for the experiment to be conducted, even though they say we live on a non-inertial reference frame that's rotating, right? Somehow miraculously, every experiment in history, the Earth is just locally inertial enough for us to, apply the laws of physics and figure things out. It's like a cat and mouse game of trying to figure out when the Earth becomes a non-inertial reference frame or not. Throughout all of history.
Let me those there. Someone said would still be interested to hear whether you guys have looked into GSMA spectrum yet in relation to GPS. Which is like the mobile network as like the global system for mobile communications association or something like that, GSMA. And he quotes, radio spectrum is used to carry info wirelessly for a vast number of vital services ranging from television and radio broadcasts, mobile phones and Wi-Fi to baby monitors, GPS and radar. And then this is a frequent thing that people are saying. It is well, I don't think there are any satellites. I don't think anything's coming from above us. I think it's all just ground-based and towers. And I want to hear your guys' take as well, but I'll quickly say, well, you can go ahead. And then
Yeah, I got you. So I feel that a large portion of what they present to us as GPS does actually come from ground networks, like dude was saying. But they do have things attached to some sort of craft up there. And the reason I think that is because they have to figure out how to get this clock to stay in sync. It goes in the face of everything that they were told about, the speed, how light works and its relationship to velocity and all that stuff. So they're accounting for something. They're accounting for a velocity. They're accounting for movement of something that's causing that retardation. And we know that through interferometry, through all the other stuff, through all the other experiments that they did involving ether, is that there is a proportional, that velocity component, that first order effect of motion translates to a first order effect in the variance in the speed of light, which is represented with first order approximations of math, where you can derive that difference through a ratio of V over C, right? When you get into the derivation of these equations, it's all, derivation, sorry. When you get into the derivation of these equations, it's all the same. It's all taking the same ratio. So velocity over the speed of light, and then the L and the other thing is just the length of the apparatus, but it's all ratios over the speed of light. So the only velocity component that comes out of that is movement that's affecting the speed of light. And then when you get into the corrections that they make for the atomic clocks, right? Because this is where it got really interesting, is this Paul Marmot paper. Is he's pointing out these equations that they reference to make their clock corrections. And one equation in particular sticks out because it's the Sagnac effect, right? It's this that they say only applies in a rotating platform, which is a non-inertial frame, etc. But then they got your boy satellite free falling around the Earth in a localized inertial frame, and they're making a Sagnac correction to the time inside the clock. And it's like, well, how are they doing that? So we get into the corrections in the math that he breaks down. Well, all these equations that look like they're accounting for Earth rotation and all these different variables and like, what are they doing there? Well, it's just a different way of them accounting for the Sagnac effect. Because, in math, you could, change some variables around, have it look a little differently, dress it up a little bit, and it's accounting for the same thing, but slightly different. That's all they did. They just changed the way that it looks, and it's just accounting for that proportional velocity of the craft. So
like Maxwell's equations. They weren't his equations. He just changed them up a little bit, and they became his equations.
Just threw in a little displacement current so that they could have electromagnetic propagation self-inducing a magnetic field, and they're good to go.
Real fast. Also, curious how No Long on the Ball asks. Curious. Just a reminder, we're moving over in within like 5 minutes to Rockfin, so you just go over the links in the description if you're still on YouTube being Goober. No Long on the Ball over Rockfin says, curious, how could one build a device to measure Earth speed? How could you even calibrate it? Well, that's exactly what Michelson and Morley did, right? I mean, it was over 10 times more sensitive than it needed to be. The way that you calibrate it is by simply having the light, within the same phase, meaning, right? Like it's synchronized. So they sent a light beam, and if you were to take two light beams and try to send them out and synchronize them, there's no way to ensure that they're going to be exactly together, exactly in sync. So they just sent one light beam and split it. When you split the light beam, you know that they're in synchronization because it's the same light beam. So they sent that, and then it goes to the center, and then it gets so it gets split and goes opposite directions. Then it reflects off the mirrors and comes back to the middle, then goes to the receiver. If the Earth is in fact moving while all this is happening, based on the direction of the light, one of the light beams is going to be behind the other light beam by the time it can get back to the receiver, and that's how you're going to measure the Earth moving. Very simple stuff, and you can verify it with many different types of motion. You can prove that this not only measures it, but precisely measures it with like immense precision. So the answer to your question is it's already been done. It's already been calibrated. It's already been created. It was actually an ingenious invention, and it was over 10 times more sensitive than it needed to be then, and be way more sensitive now. It didn't detect it, and this is what sent all physics spiraling. I can assure you, if they could have just hand-waved dismissed it and said, "Oh, this wouldn't have worked. This isn't good enough technology. Oh, you can't calibrate it. How could you really measure the motion of the Earth?" They would have said that, right? But they didn't, because they knew that they couldn't. So they had to change all of physics, and that's what happened, right? And just, I think that's the most important part. It's wild that there are flat earthers that insist that you don't look at this, but 1887 is like the linchpin in modern cosmology.
Mm-hmm.
You want to say something?
Oh, I was going to ask Alan. Could you go back to the Sagnac equation real quick? Do you have that? Now, are wavelengths of light considered? Do they consider them to travel at different speeds?
No, so the wavelength and frequency are like proportionally tied, or inversely proportional, sorry. So they have C here for their frequency, like the frequency is proportional to C, so the oscillation rate of, like 3 million meters a second.
Oh, okay, I was thinking C was for the speed of light.
Nope, and then they got their wavelength right here, and then so using the wavelength will tell you, and then how fast in the area of the propagation and how fast it was rotating or moving linearly, ratioed against that will tell you the
okay, yeah.
velocity
I saw that
pattern.
C, and I just assumed speed of light, and I was like, wait a minute, why would they have to multiply the speed of light times the wavelength? That just didn't make sense to me. But
no,
thank you.
Yeah, that's just in regard to using, because again, they'll use different light sources, so different wavelengths of light. That's how they derive the fringe pattern from it.
Yeah,
So
umlaut.
Good.
Oh, that's what they call that little mark, the umlaut, or the no.
Yeah, lambda.
Lambda. That's it, not umlaut. That's the little mark in German over the. Yeah, never mind.
Yep.
Okay, so we're gonna move over to Rockfin now. Wherever someone said, who are the new guests on the panel? I'd like to follow them on YouTube. This is Alan from Space Audit. So that's Space Audits on YouTube. I'll try to remember to add their links in the description. And you also have Toby, who runs Ether Cosmology. So that's Ether Cosmology, AETHER Cosmology, and 2 words. It's also in Discord. He also has a Discord. server called Ether Cosmology that hosts a lot of these really dope conversations and even reading night and stuff. And so I encourage you guys to join there as well. I'll add those links to the descriptions per our guests. Okay, so before we move off of YouTube, anybody got something they want to say to the YouTubers that are too cool to move over to where we can have free speech and actually continue to do this?
Yeah, real quick. If you haven't caught the GLOBEBUSTERS Tech episode, it was a good one that really it made me think a lot. We got into occult symbolism and started comparing the old symbols, the magic sigils they call them, to today's electrical schematics and the similarity. What if all these magic symbols were actually just their schematics of that time for whatever kind of technology they were using to build the structures they did and all that kind of stuff? They had to have advanced schools that taught you, advanced physics, which would have their own type of language, a schematic system. Yeah, it was an awesome episode. So if you missed it and you haven't seen any GLOBEBUSTER Tech one, that's a good one to start on. Because I had a lot of fun doing that one.
Nice. That's GLOBEBUSTERS Text, and that's on Tuesdays, 7 Eastern?
Thursdays, 7 Eastern.
Oh, Thursdays, my bad, yeah. 7 Eastern. Okay, cool. Anyone else want to say something to the YouTube that won't move over?
Yeah, check Toby and I out on Tuesdays on Ether Cosmology or on my channel. We go live every Tuesday at 7 p.m. We usually do a targeted presentation on a subject, and then on Thursdays we've been doing like an open research night where it's a focused research night. We'll have a topic, we'll have some papers, we'll read through them, go over them, discuss them with people, and if anyone wants to come in, listen in, or ask questions themselves, you're more than welcome to come hang out and just learn. We're all learning together. None of us are experts in the field or anything like that. We're just going through the information and trying to figure it out. And it's a really fun process. And that's what we do over there. And that's what we promote and facilitate. So if you're interested in that, check us out.
Cool. And let's save most of the closings for the people that aren't lame and are going to move over. Jeran, I see you come off mute. I thought I did, but yeah, because we'll obviously have like a closing segment at the end. I think we can do it. I mean, it depends on when people want to do. We can do a solid another 30, 45 minutes. We started at a little late. We can go as long as you guys want to, but we'll finish it up over there, and then we'll kind of tell everyone what we got going on the next week. So cool. I think we're just going to move over, but thank you guys for watching. It's rockfin.com/globebusters, as you see on the screen. Also, we're dropping the specific stream link in the description. Justin Johnston's been dropping it. Many other mods did. And we encourage you guys to go over there because that's what makes this possible. It is not YouTube, who we know will just randomly axe any type of funding that ever could happen, of course. So cool. Thank you guys for kicking it. If you're not going to move over, then, well, you suck, and we'll see you next week. I'm kind of kidding, but all right. Yeah, you can go ahead and know how it goes Sundays at 3 o'clock. So, all right, let's bid farewell to the YouTube, and we're going to go over to Rockfin. Peace.
Peace.